Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Nic Perez, the Chief Technology Officer for Cloud at ThunderCat Technology. Nic, good to have you with us.
Thanks, Tom. It was a pleasure.
You know, there's a phenomenon that sometimes occurs in the government where a big contract is awarded, established with a lot of fanfare. Now we're looking forward to the Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability contract. What's your sense of if and how the defense components will actually use it?
I love you, Tom. You always go straight to the core topic. It's a great time to be in IT, and JWCC is just one of those elements that comes out that is really going to drive a phenomenal amount of innovation. You know, I'd say in the journey of cloud, the last, 15 years that we've been working on this, there has been, obviously, it was a lot of infrastructure as a service was the first kind of figurehead, first placement. And now the cloud providers have moved on to managed services and these easier to consumability. But the DoD and those different types of groups, they haven't had that ability to do that, to actually leverage infrastructure and get those elements. So there's been a bit of a plateau. There's been a lot of manufacturers that have been able to kind of catch up or have a legal a footing and get themselves established. And now there's going to be a lot more innovation that's happening. We're already seeing it. Obviously, JWCC was just announced barely the end of last year. And we're already seeing announcements from the major cloud providers of physical equipment, modular data centers that they're being provided. So these abilities of taking modules that would not be available. I call them cloud technologies on premise or cloud technologies in theater. And it's just very, very exciting. And the ability for departments within the DoD that have been obviously, I would say, very frustrated about their ability that yes, they can onboard software as a service, and they've been doing that in a large amount. But being able to do it at the infrastructure and the application level has been, they've been blocked from it. They haven't been able, or they have to go do their own contracts, which is very, 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 very difficult to do.
And if you're buying, again, from the DoD standpoint, a software as a service offering, does that have to be hosted in the JWCC cloud? I mean, the big providers are on JWCC, and I think most of the software as a service vendors, those are software companies, not really cloud companies.
Absolutely.
But yet where they're hosted can have an impact on the usability, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, it depends on the impact level, what the customer is demanding, but from, now that providers are impact level 5 pretty consistently across the board, those workloads can operate, in those different versions, in those cloud providers. You don't have to have a separate GovCloud type regions these days to actually do workloads. And I think after the challenges we've had over the last 3 years, a lot of people are looking at classifications and how complicated and difficult it was to get access to those systems and why were they classified at those typically tight levels, low side, high side, impact level 3 versus 5, right? And so being able to, the cloud providers have the technique, the manufacturers bring those particular products, and then we have, FedRAMP has done an amazing job of being able to create the level playing field. It was an investment in both time and money for these manufacturers to get their products there, but obviously, if you were very security focused and had your documentation up to speed, it was actually a quicker process to get FedRAMP ready than maybe some others, but the DoD can now leverage all of those capabilities, all those investments, and actually somewhat hit the ground running.
So do you think, therefore, it's easier for them to use the infrastructure as a service now for modernized DoD native applications because of these additional services surrounding what used to be the bare metal?
Without a doubt. You hit it on the head. That's exactly what it is. So they can absolutely delve straight in. They can lift and shift workloads, which has been very, very traditional, so they can get themselves started. They can get to understand, vendor management, software, service level agreements, and those type of things, which are quite different from what you're being on premise. You buy a server, you install your software, it runs 24/7, and you can lift and shift that to the cloud. But you get many of the benefits of it, but one of the benefits of the cloud is that you can save money and save costs. It's very difficult to realize that when you just lift and shift. So if you think like the old way, now the customers, when we're talking to them, they're looking to optimize their environments. So they're saying, hey, I'm going to use some of those vendor managed services that are being provided. I'm going to somewhat less, dumb down the actual footprint of that particular, maybe an instance in the IaaS, and I'm going to use some elements of serverless. And I got other customers now that I would say is they're moving on to the day 3 of cloud, is where they're actually looking at those workloads and saying, do I need the 1 millisecond latency? Do I need to run that as fast as with provisioned IOPS? And they're taking a second look. Go, actually, no, I don't. Upstream systems can't handle that kind of speed, even though I could process it in a millisecond here. I got a system up speed that needs a couple of seconds. So they're kind of looking at that, and again, we're documenting it and help them understand that so they can realize those savings costs when they do look at moving workloads.
So it sounds like they have the opportunity to modernize applications and know they can run natively now.
That's the key.
As opposed to lift and shift, but they can also optimize whatever they're running.
Absolutely.
Because of the cost need and the fact that not everyone needs the same level of service around the clock.
The beauty of it is if you can lift and shift the easy, low-hanging fruit, the stuff that just get out of the way, and that you can then transform and focus on the ones that are really key to the mission. And you may be able to buy like a SaaS product instead of building something that that is certainly definitely on the table when you look at your portfolio. But again, its key is to focus on the mission of the system that you want and your contractors. So all of the different teams that you have, they can focus on the kind of core applications that are going to make a lot of difference and move away some of the stuff that doesn't happen.
And you mentioned the idea of replicating cloud-like environments in the data center. So what's the future for the data center that's still operated by DoD and the armed services? Because they say, these are never going to go away completely.
ThunderCat's a traditional reseller. I don't think they're going away anytime soon either. So the key is, it's the same way. I always use this analogy of rental cars. So yes, you can buy a car. Yes, you can lease a car. And absolutely, and there's lots of trade-offs there. That's on premise. You're still going to have people who are going to buy a car, lease a car. The ability for the DoD now is they get into taxis, into Uber, into Turo, into the Lime scooter. Now they've got all of that capability that they haven't had before. So on-premise data centers isn't going away. They've still got petabytes of storage. Even though storage is cheap in the cloud, storing petabytes of it can get expensive. So putting stuff on-premise and or putting stuff in a co-location facility. That's one of the key elements we help customers with. I come from Ashburn. There's 200 plus of those data centers. Many of them are DoD spec data centers. And then when you put your equipment in a colo, you're literally a couple of milliseconds away from access to those big cloud providers.
Right, and you mentioned data. We went by that point pretty quickly, but with vast petabyte level data storage, it might mitigate, economically to keep it in your own data center, because it's so expensive to extract large data sets from the cloud. So maybe that's a good argument for keeping that on premise, if nothing else is just your data lake or your data store.
You can do. I would be happy to have someone take this on and debate that particular topic. To me, when you move the data to the cloud, it creates its own kind of gravitational pull, and the application is going to come with it. And I think that's a healthy thing to think about. The challenge you have when it's on premise is that equipment is going to get old. It needs to be refreshed, right? It needs to be constantly kind of touched and patched and looked at. And is the storage the key thing that you want to hold on to, right? Yes, encryption may be the key element. Maybe high-speed performance, enterprise-grade storage may be something that you need. Absolutely, you can keep that. But you've got to back it up. You've typically got a duplicate environment. And so you may have your primary be in premise, but you may have your backup, archive, cold storage be utilizing in the cloud.
All right, let's talk about the acquisition end of this and the procurement end of this. What do you see as the trends in people buying cloud services?
Yeah, so
whether JWCC or any other vehicle.
My apologies. So that still is to me the biggest barrier to entry is procurement. Is trying to determine. We call it non-labor services, right? So I'm procuring a service like a utility. And the challenge is still to try to estimate what that is going to cost. I work daily in the federal space, and so we work with contracts, fixed term price, time and materials, not to exceed amounts, and it's very difficult for contracting officers and their teams to really accurately determine what that cost is going to be. You're an API call away from really changing your bill on a daily basis, right? And so the cloud providers are doing a good job. There's a lot of tooling out there, but it's very, very difficult and complicated. And we spend a lot of time, helping customers understand what that bill is, what that bill will be. And again, that's the opportunity. So yes, I can lift and shift, like I said, a workload, and you'll get to understand how many hours, there's 730 hours a month, and that server will run for that period of time. And so I can figure out what it's going to cost. But if I can turn off that dev box and that test box, and I can turn off those things at 8 p.m. at night and come on at 8 a.m. in the morning, you can save like 60% of the cost of that server when there was nothing actually to do. And I think that's the key element, is when servers were on premise, you build a server and it had a job and it was sitting there waiting for something to arrive. Now in the cloud, you can actually configure the system so the compute only runs when there is something to do, so that the cost is directly tied to a particular workload, whether that be like a piece of data that needs to be transformed, an image that needs to be done, a video that needs to, you do it when something has been created instead of just running something 24/7 just in case something happens along the way.
So your homework really needs to include the usage patterns historically so you can get some idea of what your costs might be.
The two are tied together, but the challenge is typically the application developers, they never had to think of that, right? You just had the servers, I RDP'd or SSH into a machine and I just used it, or I used my pipeline and it deployed it. So now those particular type, the application developers, the security engineers, they need to have a very, very key element about the cost. And like I said, to sustainability, do I need that speed? Do I need that 96 gigs of RAM available for that particular workload? Yeah, and for most of the times, no, you don't. A couple of days a month, maybe, but certainly not 24/7.
All right, so to add it all up, then you really need a team approach to make the best use of cloud.
Absolutely, and so the tenets so everyone's moving through is to agile, to DevOps, and moving into a much more of a team coming together. It also involves your program office, your contracting office, your legal ability, and then ultimately your vendor management, demand management kind of team, absolutely coming together and looking at it. But again, they're working together to focus on the mission application. If you can get rid of the other stuff that moves and move that stuff out of the way, like lift and shift it, or move it to somewhere like VMware Cloud on AWS or any of those type enterprise grade where you vMotion a workload and you can move it, then the team is released. They're not managing servers, they're not managing equipment, they're not buying stuff in the data center. They're using this rental model. When they can all think like that, absolutely, the teamwork comes together, and obviously, clearly, the magic starts to happen.
All right, some great insight. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Nic Perez is the Chief Technology Officer for Cloud at ThunderCat Technology. I'm Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on the DoD Cloud Exchange.